The output of a merge join is a single result set from the join, based on the type of join that you specify within the component. You're limited to joining just two flows, both of which have to be sorted. But you can easily string these transformations together to combine other flows. There's no provision for splitting matched and unmatched rows into separate output flows. Instead, you'd need to do something like use a conditional split transformation to test for null values on the unmatched rows in order to create a separate data flow for processing. So it's not entirely flexible, but there are tools within integration services that let you do just about anything you'd want to do within the merge join transformation, or at least with the output data. Now, if the data flows are coming from the same database source, say a single SQL Server database, you're better off performing the join in the connection manager that you use to get the data from the database. That way, your query will perform far better, taking advantage of the database engine's optimizations for join operations. It's just something that database engines do very, very efficiently. But where the merge join transformation comes in handy is if the data that you want to join is coming from different data sources, say one from a SQL Server and another from an Oracle database, or from sources that don't support data operations, like a flat text file. It's also handy if you don't want to write your own join code and are willing to tolerate a little bit of a drop in performance, which can actually be somewhat significant. And sometimes you'll find that you need to process a data flow in the package using other transformations before joining it with another data flow, even if the two flows are from the same source. All right, so there are some exceptions to that general rule. Now, to keep things simple, most of the examples that I'm going to be using in this course use data flows from a single SQL Server database. And that just makes it easier to get the data into the package so that we can really focus on learning the join techniques. Now, the merge join transformation tends to require relatively little memory because it receives rows in the input data flows, processes them, and sends them to the output data flow immediately. As a result, it doesn't need to include a lot of data in memory. It doesn't have to wait for all of the rows to come in from the input flow. But one potential problem with the transformation is that there's no short-circuit execution. And that means that both input data flows need to stream their entire contents before the transformation completes its work. That means that if one data flow has a handful of rows, just a small number, maybe even a half dozen, and if those are immediately joined with rows from the other data flow that has millions of rows, all of the data from that second flow, all those millions of rows, have to flow through the component, even though there's no more rows to process from the first data flow. And this could potentially take some time, even though there's no chance of making a join with the other flow. So just keep that in mind, particularly if you're working with data flows that have widely dissimilar numbers of rows within them. Also, integration services has other transformations that can merge multiple data flows, including the union all and merge transformations. These two transformations are similar in that they combine the rows of data from two or more data flows using an operation much like the union keyword in a SQL select statement. But despite the similarity in names, the merge transformation does not perform a join on the data as the merge join transformation does. The operations are actually quite different. So just be aware, merge, similar to union all, merge and merge join, completely different. What I'm going to do in this exercise is to create a package that will read data from several tables in the AdventureWorks 2012 database. And I'll create a data flow that will be equivalent to this SQL statement right here. So as you can see, what the select statement does is it reads data from the product table. Again, this is all within the AdventureWorks 2012 database. And it's going to join it, do a left outer join with the product subcategory to get the subcategory name, product model information to get the model for that particular product, and then get the category item as well. And so this is a fairly typical kind of a SQL statement. And so you can join data from multiple tables in a well-normalized database. The result set is going to consist of 504 rows. All right, so we want to duplicate this within an integration services package. Now, because a merge join can only join two flows together at once, the package is going to need to use 3 merge join transformations. One for the first 2, another to join that output with the third table, and then yet another in order to merge that output from the previous merge join with the final table. And then, as it performs a join, it's going to, the set of merge join transformations are going to add additional columns to the output flow because we need to read data and include it in the output from each of those joins. All right, so if I select that, whoops, don't want to do that. Well, mouse problems. There we go. For some reason it wasn't selecting it. Okay, so if I go ahead and execute that, it goes against the table. Notice that we get 504 rows, as I mentioned. Notice that we do have some rows that have null category and subcategory information. But otherwise, it has the product and list price usually. And if I scroll down here, you see that eventually we run out of null data and we start having category and subcategory information. And as you can see, we have about 209 rows. We have 209 rows of data without category and subcategory, and then the remaining rows have that information. Okay, so this is the overall result set that we're going to end up with within the integration services. And I want to emphasize one more time, generally you would want to use a SQL statement like this to join these together because the database engine is far more efficient. But if this data was actually coming from multiple different sources, or I had to process it again, or had the various other reasons, then I might want to use a merge join. Bring it into the package and use a merge join. Okay, so let's start building the package. I'll come over here to SQL Server Data Tools, do a File, New Project, and in this project I want to call merge join. And I'll put it in the joins folder. And I'll go ahead and create it. And as usual, I'll come over here to Solution Explorer, and I'll rename the package merge join as well. All right, now all of the work in this package is going to happen in the data flow task. So I'll go ahead and add that from the SSIS toolbox. I'll just double click on that, and there we have the data flow task. And I'll go over to the data flow designer, and we're ready to start building the project. First thing I want to do is create a connection manager. I don't have any of those here within this brand new project yet. Now I could do this from within the merge join, but I'm going to be using this over and over again because I have to create 4 different data flows, one for each of the tables that I'm getting data from. So I'm just going to start off right off the bat and create one down here within the connection manager's pane. In order to connect to SQL Server, I needed a new OLEDB connection. And as you can see, I've in the past used this version of, or this instance of SQL Server Data Tools to create a couple of connections. So I've already got them, so I'm just going to use that existing one right there. Again, this is just the connection to the database. It doesn't have any information about what data I'm going to extract from the database using this connection. But if I didn't have an existing data connection for the database that I want, I would just click on the New button there and go through the process of providing the server name and the login information as usual. Okay, but I've got it, so I'm going to use it. All right, so now we have a local connection manager that we can start using within our package. All right, now I'm going to create an OLEDB data source. So I'll come down here and OLEDB source, double click there. And this is going to tell the package where and how to get the information for that first data flow, which is going to be for the products in the AdventureWorks 2012 database. All right, I'll double click on it. All right, so now we can configure this OLEDB data source. First thing I want to do is make sure that I'm going to use this connection manager. Happens to be the only one in the package, so that's what I'm going to get. But if I needed another one, here is where I could create a new connection manager. And no reason not to create it here, even though this is the first of 3 different merge joins, or actually 4 different data sources. I could create it here, and it's still going to be shareable amongst the package. So there's nothing special about my having created it up front, but I just wanted to get that step out of the way. All right, I'm not going to read the entire table because it has a lot of columns that I really don't need. So I'm going to select the SQL command option here. And then here's where I can type in a SQL statement, SQL command text. Or I could use the build query, get a nice graphic designer in order to design the query. But I'll just come back over to my Management Studio here, where I've already written these statements. Okay, let me make sure I get the entire statement there. So I'll copy that and paste it in. All right, so you don't have to watch me sit and type. So as you can see, all this is doing is it's getting the information from the production.product table. And all I need for this package is the name, list price. That's the data that I'm going to include from this table in the output. But then I also need the product model ID and the product subcategory ID, because those are the key fields that I'm going to join some of this data on. So I need those for later. Those won't appear in the final output data flow, but again, I need them in order to make the joins. They have to be part of the data source. Okay, so I'll go ahead and preview the data, and there you can see the first 200 rows. As you can see, within the first 200 rows, it's all null product model and product subcategory information. But if we could see all the rows, it would have non-null values for that as well. All right, so we're happy with that data. And then I'll go to the columns page here. So this shows the mapping from the columns that are specified in the SQL statement, which is this right here. And so here it has the names of the external columns from the SQL statement, and they're matched to the output columns, which by default get the same name as the columns within the table. I could change these. I can select them, change them, whatever. But these names are fine for our purposes. All right, so I'll click on OK because we finished configuring the OLADB source. As you can see, there's no longer a red X icon, so the source is it has the information it needs in order to run. The one other thing I want to do is change the name of this. I'm going to have 4 of these. So I'm going to change this to Product Data Source. Now I could accept the default names of the later ones that'll just number them, but then if I need to come back and look at the configuration or change the query that gets the product data, it's going to be a lot easier to find this, particularly if I have 15 or 20 or more data sources of various kinds. Okay, now I need to add a second data source. And this time it's to get the data from the product subcategory table. So I'll come back over here, drag on another OLADB data source, move it over just a little bit. We have our jumping icon there. And this one I'm going to call the subcategory data source. And hit enter. And then double click on that to configure it. Once again, going to use AdventureWorks 2012, use a SQL command, and I'll go back over to Management Studio and copy this select statement. And paste it in. And as you can see, there we're getting the product subcategory ID, the product category ID, and the name. So the name is what I want to bring into the set of columns that are going to be the final output of this integration services package. But I also need to include the product subcategory because that's what's going to be linked to the product information. And then later on, I'm going to get the category name as well, so I need to have this key as well. All right, and it's coming from product subcategory, and as you can see, just like the product information, I'm sorting the data. And I'm sorting it on the field that it's going to make the join on. Okay, so that's a requirement of the merge join. All right, next let's go over to the columns page. And once again, it lists the available external columns, so I can pick and choose those if I don't want to include them all. But in this case, I wrote a SQL statement to just include the fields that I want, so I'm going to include them all. And then it has the names of the columns and the mapping. Now, this is one change that I want to make. Several of the tables, including the product table, use the name field. Category table does as well. So I want to change this to something meaningful. And I'm going to change this to subcategory. So that way, it'll be very easy to identify what that data is. And I won't have any conflicts down the line with multiple name fields. All right, that one is configured. And now we have our two initial data flows. All right, I'm going to position that up a little bit, make it look a little bit better. And now it's time to create our first merge join. So I'll come back over here and scroll back up to there. Just be careful not to use merge. You want merge join. And I'll add it to this data flow. All right, I need to link the data flows from my two sources to this merge join. So I'll drag this arrow over here. And notice that I get this dialog box, input-output selection. Now, the source or the destination component contains multiple inputs or outputs. In this case, it's the merge join that has multiple inputs. So I want to select the merge join left input. So this is going to be the left side of that outer join. This isn't always critical, but in this case it is, because within the merge join, it needs to know which table or which data flow we're going to use all the rows from. But if there's no matches in subcategory, then we don't want to include that additional information necessarily. All right, so that's why it's important here. All right, and I'll click on OK. And just a reminder once again, anytime you add a new transformation or a data destination to the data flow designer, don't forget to do the first thing of connect any input data flows to it, because this component needs to know the information that it's getting in from one or more data flows. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing with a subcategory data source and drop it on. And notice this time I didn't get that dialog box. There's only one other input stream available for the merge join. Again, it can only join two streams, two data flows. And so it just automatically guessed that I wanted to assign it to the other one. An extremely valid guess. Okay, we're also going to have multiple merge joins. So I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it merge product subcategory. Okay, so that's a naming convention that works for me, but you may have to use different naming schemes within your integration services package. Just depends on what sort of things that you need to keep separate from other similar kinds of components. Okay, so if I hover the mouse over here, notice that I have this message, merge product subcategory inputs, merge join left input must be sorted. If possible, sort the DAT and nothing else appears. But we can go down to the error list here and see the full message. So what it says is, must be sorted. If possible, sort the data at the source and mark the data as sorted by setting the isSorted and sort key position properties in the advanced editor. Otherwise, add a sort transformation to the path before the merge. And then we have a second one saying that essentially the other input data flow needs to be sorted as well. Okay, now there actually is more to configure with the merge join transformation than this two error messages talking about two different flows. But this does provide a preview of one of the issues that you have to deal with when you use the merge join. Again, it requires the data to be sorted. But, okay, this seems kind of strange. If you recall, both of my select statements for the data sources, in fact, easy way to see them is if we go back over to Management Studio here, I sorted both of these statements on the same field. So the data, when it's coming in from these data sources, is sorted. So what's going on with that? Well, the problem is that the data sources aren't transparent about the order of data. So, in other words, it doesn't expose externally, it doesn't try to parse that SQL statement and tell the world, the rest of the integration services package, that it's sorted in any particular way or even whether it's sorted at all. So, the merge join has no way of knowing whether the data is sorted or not. The good news is that there's two solutions to the problem. And best of all, they're indicated in the body of the error message. Don't you just love it when an error message has an accurate assessment of the problem along with actual real solutions? I just love Microsoft's awakening to the value of error message information over the last several years. So that's great. All right, so adding a sort transformation would actually do nothing to help here. The data is already sorted, and so all that's going to do is add some serious overhead performance and a performance hit to the package. And again, that's because the data is already sorted. So I'm going to use the isSorted option. All right, so what we need to do is come up here to the product data source. We have to do this for both of the data sources. I'm going to right-click and show the advanced editor. Now, this is a little bit of a convoluted editor. It has lots of options. It does various things here. You can manage the connection managers, look at various component properties. There's a few things that you can change here. You can look at the column mappings here. But what we want to do is we want to change the input and output properties here. And specifically, we find the isSorted property on this OLEDB source output. And there you can see it right there. So I'll double click on that to set it to true. So now we've indicated, essentially we've told the data source to expose to the rest of the package that the data is in fact sorted. And make sure it's sorted if you use this option. Bad things can happen if you lie to integration services. All right, but there's one other thing that we need to do. This says that the data is sorted, but it doesn't say anything about how the data is sorted. So next, what I need to do is expand this node here, go down here to Output Columns, and select the Product Subcategory ID. And then what I need to do is change this Sort Key Position property. Now, the way this property works is a bit convoluted, but it does provide a great deal of flexibility. If the value here is 0, as you can see, that's the default value, and if you look at all the other fields, it's the default value for all of the columns. So if it's 0, you're saying that the column is unsorted. Okay, that's cool. If the column is in ascending order, the value should be a positive number. Or, if it's in descending order, it should be a negative number. And then, the absolute value of the number is that column's position in the sort order. All right, so that's probably kind of confusing to just talk about. So let me show you how this works. So let's say that I have just this made-up select statement. This isn't, obviously I have the red squigglies. This isn't data that's contained within AdventureWorks. It's just a sample select statement. But I'm doing a select star, so I'm getting all the fields from some customer's table. And I'm ordering by last name in ascending order, that's the default, by first name in ascending order, and then by date of birth in descending order. Okay? So if this was the SQL statement for a data source within a data flow package, and I need to indicate what the sort key position was, I would select the last name field, just like I just selected the one field within the package. I would select last name, and I would set that to 1. Because it's the first field in the sort order, and it's in ascending order, so it's positive 1. Then I would select first name, and I would set that to 2. Second item in the sort order, and it's in ascending order, so it's positive. And then I'd go to date of birth, and I would set that equal to -3. 3 because it's in the third sort order position, and -3 because it's in descending order. Okay, so hopefully that makes it clear how this thing works. All right, so in this case, I'm only sorting on the product subcategory ID, and so I'm going to set that to 1. All right, so those are the two things that I need to do. But again, if data was sorted in multiple fields, I would need to visit each of the fields in the order by statement and set those. Okay, so I've done it for that one. Now I need to come over here and do it for my second data source. Come over here, source output, say is sorted, drill down here. In this particular case, the field name is the same. It doesn't need to be on the join. And I'll set that sort order position to 1 as well. Click on OK. And so now we have told the package, or specifically the merge join transformation, that those two data sources are sorted. All right, but notice that we still have the red X. If I hover over here, I have a different error message. Okay, so we're not done configuring the component, so I'll double-click on it and open up the Merge Join Transformation Editor. All right, now remember that the join that I created in that SQL statement that I showed you is a left outer join. So the default is inner join, but I need to change this to left outer join. Now, one thing to notice about this is that there's no right outer join option. If I in fact needed to do a right outer join, what I would need to do is select the left outer join and then use the swap inputs to swap the two data flows so that the one that I want to include all the rows of is on the left side. So just be aware of that little anomaly in using this dialog box. Okay, now I need to specify the join fields. So what I want to do is actually widen this a little bit so you can see all the columns. Now, what's interesting here is that I already have this join line defined. The only reason this happened is because essentially the component guessed what the fields were. No big logic here. It just looked for fields of the same name, product subcategory ID and product subcategory ID. It guessed that that's the join, and it was right. You know, that's one of the benefits of having consistent naming throughout tables. You get some of that kind of automation. They don't have to be the same name, just like in a transact SQL statement. You can have different names. You just have to specify what the match is. If it didn't make the right guess here, what I would need to do is just grab that field there and drag it over to this other field, and that would create that join line. All right, last thing I need to do here is tell it what columns to include in the output data flow. I'm not going to need the product subcategory ID for any other joins, any other purpose I don't want to include in the output, so I'm not going to select that. But I will need the other ID fields for later joins. I need the product model for later. I need the product category for later, so I'll include both of those. And then I also want to include the product name and the list price in the output. Again, that's the particular data that I want to include from that table. And then the subcategory as well, because that's why I'm joining on the product subcategory table. All right, so that's my mapping. As usual, I can select anything over here and change the name if I want to change it. I don't need to do that here. But if I hadn't changed the subcategory name earlier, then I could do it here as well. All right, I'll click on OK. And now you see that the red X icon is gone and the merge join is configured. Now, before I go any further, I want to go ahead and test this package, make sure the join's working, and see if I need to make any adjustments. Because if I'm going to add 2 more data sources and 2 more merge joins. So if there's any way I'm configuring this that is wrong, better to find it out now rather than having to go back through and fix a bunch of stuff. So what I'm going to do is kind of a tricky little technique. I'm going to use a union all. Because what I want to do is I want to have a data flow coming out of the merge product subcategory, the merge join component there, so that I can see the data that it's generating. I'm going to use a data viewer for that. There's no way, just if I stopped here, to just display the data that's in the output. The nice thing about a union all is it provides a nice endpoint for a package. So I'm going to come here. I'll select that output arrow there. And then that's going to go to the union all. That's going to do absolutely nothing with it. I'm not going to use anything with the output of the union all. But now I just need to right-click on this and enable a data viewer, and that's what's going to let me look at the data that is generated from the 2 data sources and then merged together. And the nice thing about using a union all is it doesn't require any other configuration. There's a lot of other transformations and data destinations that you can do the same thing with, but often you need to do some sort of configuration, I'm just going to delete the union all as I continue to proceed with building this package. So the less configuration I need to do, the better. All right, so we're all set. I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And I'll have a quick compile step and then start executing things. Move this out of the way. You can see what's going on. So as you can see, I've finished getting all of the data from the product data source. It has 500 rows. As well as from the subcategory data source, it has 37 rows. And then the merge is still happening. So here's the data. So let me widen this a little bit so I can show all the columns. And a little bit more. Okay, because I have the subcategory ID and null value for many of the items in the product table, I have null data there. And then I also have null product model ID and category ID. If this is null, this is going to be null. If I scroll down here, eventually I'll get past those 209 null rows. And there you can see that we do in fact have mountain bike data, all this other data for all of the other rows. Okay, so that looks pretty good. One thing to point out here is notice that, just telling from the little thumb there, less than half of the data has null values. Meaning, of course, that more than half the data has non-null values. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's a characteristic of the data. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click the Proceed button there. And the package continues to final execution. As you can see, we got 504 rows passed through there. So that's always good to check, because if I did something wrong with configuring the join here, maybe I accidentally used an inner join where I really wanted an outer join, I'd have less rows here. And so it's good to see the number of rows and make sure that I have what I want. All right, so last thing to do is stop execution. And so at this point, we know that the package does what we want it to do.